Welcome to this new automotive news video for Thursday, May 14th, 2026. And today we're going to talk about BYD, which is interested in acquiring some brands from the Stellantis group, especially Maserati. This won't be the only news of this kind, as we'll also talk about XPeng, another Chinese brand that is reportedly negotiating with Volkswagen to buy its German factories. We'll also discuss Freelander, a sub-brand by Land Rover and Chinese partner Chery, as it unveils its first model. We'll also talk about Germany, where there's fear of a new wave of massive layoffs in the automotive industry. And finally, we'll have some broader news as we'll talk about European manufacturers who are regrouping and mobilizing again to put pressure on the European Commission and ask for another postponement of the end of combustion engines. These are the topics of this video for Thursday the 14th. The video will have very basic editing, as I have a huge workday today, and tomorrow will be in the same style with more regular videos returning from Saturday. In the meantime, if you still found this one interesting, feel free to show your support by leaving a like, by subscribing for the next videos, boosting this one if the option appears for you, and leaving a comment where you share your thoughts on today's news. We're going to talk about Stellantis, which announced yesterday that it will expand its partnerships with other brands, especially with Chinese brands. Several projects are already underway, such as the partnership with Leapmotor. The Chinese brand Stellantis distributes in Europe and will now co-develop certain models for its European brands, such as Opel. A few days ago, a partnership with the Chinese brand Dongfeng was also announced, where they would be sharing a factory. That means Stellantis could use Dongfeng's factories in China to produce certain Peugeot models that it will sell in China, and in return, Dongfeng should be able to use some of Stellantis Group's factories to produce vehicles that it will sell in Europe. Now, there's a new partnership taking shape with BYD, a partnership that's really interesting because we're talking about buying a factory, but also about buying a brand. That's exactly what we were concerned about and predicted on this channel in our videos and comments. We all agreed on it. It looks like Stellantis is gradually trying to get rid of everything related to Europe to focus only on its brands and the American market. As I explained in a recent video, half of Stellantis' European factories are operating at less than 50% of their capacity. These are unprofitable factories that Stellantis is now looking to share with Chinese brands like Dongfeng, but also to sell. And this is of particular interest to BYD, which, as its vice president explained, is looking to buy any available European factory. The factories targeted by BYD, the ones they're interested in, are mainly Italian factories, especially the Casino factory, which previously made Alfa Romeo cars like the Tonale and Giulia, as well as the Maserati model tied to Alfa Romeo. And this is where it gets quite interesting. BYD no longer wants to limit itself to just buying factories and infrastructure, but also wants to acquire brands. And here the Maserati brand is particularly targeted. It's true that this will suit everyone a bit because Stellantis hasn't been able to make Maserati profitable. They can't manage because they've become too difficult to sell. With the electric models, it really flopped badly for Maserati, and the gas-powered versions are still very expensive, even though the engines are nice. The V6 Nettuno is a very good engine, but it is probably not as desirable as a V8 or a V12 from Ferrari or Lamborghini, even though Maserati's prices sometimes get close to those too. Maserati hasn't been doing well. For at least a year and a half, there have been rumors that Stellantis wants to sell it. And since the vice president of BYD said that Maserati was, I quote, a very interesting brand for a possible acquisition, with BYD looking to buy European brands for brand image, but also for technological know-how. We're still good in Europe at making high-performance supercars and powerful combustion engines. And since BYD is in a period where it's trying to move up market with its premium brands like Denza or Yangwang, having Maserati, which is still a brand that, even if it's niche in terms of sales, has an aura, a pretty well-known reputation in Europe, well, that would be a really great move for them. Also, if BYD buys factories where some Maseratis are produced, like the Casino factory, it would be logistically easier to keep producing something that's already being made there, rather than having to adapt production lines for a new model or a new brand. So Maserati is very likely to become Chinese in the next few months. And there are a very good chance that a large number of European factories will also become Chinese in the coming months. For example, on the BYD side, the vice president explained that she preferred to fully acquire factories rather than share them with a European brand, as it was easier to manage. And with XPeng, there is also a very strong interest in Volkswagen factories. At Volkswagen as well, they are preparing to sell or share several German factories, especially those that are not operating at full capacity, particularly factories where they used to make electric cars that are not selling very well, especially the factories in Dresden and Osnabrück. And apparently one of these factories would be the main target for XPeng, which wants to buy one because it's much faster and simpler to buy an existing factory rather than build a brand new one. An acquisition of infrastructure that could happen quite quickly, since Volkswagen and XPeng are already partners in China, where they have a joint venture, and because there are already ties between these two brands. So we'll see what happens. It's both good news and bad news. So of course it's bad news to see European brands gradually being replaced by Chinese brands. On the other hand, it might help save a little bit.
Industriel, notamment en Allemagne, on redoute une nouvelle vague
of industrial jobs, especially in Germany, where there are fears of a new massive wave of layoffs in the automotive sector, or at least a wave of staff reductions. Indeed, the VDA, which is the Association of German Car Manufacturers and Suppliers, fears that on top of the 100,000 job cuts already planned in Germany by 2035, additional cuts will come. An additional 125,000 jobs, which would make a total of 225,000 jobs that will disappear by 2035 in less than 10 years. According to the VDA, a direct consequence would be an acceleration of the decline of this sector in Germany, especially with major problems for the suppliers. It's true that we don't talk about it often. I mostly focus on French suppliers because that's what concerns us the most. But in Germany, it's a bloodbath. Suppliers are shutting down every day. For decades in Germany, the focus was mainly on combustion engine technology. It's not going to get any better, because all the companies that used to make engine parts, transmission components, exhaust systems, cooling systems, in short, everything related to combustion engines are going to disappear because we're moving, whether we like it or not, to electric cars. The VDA estimates that the transition to all-electric is happening too quickly, that customers aren't keeping up, and that both suppliers and manufacturers are ultimately too far behind technologically compared to China to be competitive, also because of labor costs and energy prices. That's why the VDA is now joining other car manufacturers to start a new lobbying campaign targeting the European Commission to get new changes regarding the flexibility of CO2 standards, but also the potential postponement of the end of combustion engines from 2035. There were some relaxations at the end of last year, but that's not enough, as we see daily in the news stories I discuss in my videos. Every day we see European brands struggling, and every day we see Chinese brands gradually taking over shares of the European car market.
La VDA s'associe aux autres constructeurs.
So they are joining forces with other European car manufacturers, but also with supplier associations like CLEPA, and they're all asking for pretty much the same things, namely a new relaxation of the CO2 standards in 2035, because you should know that last year, at the end of the year, there was already an adjustment. In theory, combustion engines will still be allowed to be sold in 2035, but in very small quantities. That was already, let's say, a first piece of news, the first good news compared to what was really stated before. Manufacturers now think the small share left for combustion engines from 2035 to 2040 is too little, and are asking the European Commission to clearly state once and for all that after 2035, manufacturers will have technological neutrality, allowing them to choose any engines or methods as long as CO2 targets are met.
À partir du moment où les objectifs CO2 sont atteints.
If some do it by going electric, that's great. If some do it with hydrogen, that's great too. But if some manage to do it by developing engines that run on synthetic gasoline, for example, well, that should also be allowed. The manufacturers explained that given the current situation, considering the still rather low sales of electric cars, even though they've increased recently, it's still not enough. The decisions of the European Commission needed to be revised so they could be faster, more agile, and adapt to the context. Because let's remember, and this is also something that the VDA and CLEPA explained in their statement to the European Commission, European manufacturers are technologically lagging behind China. European manufacturers, when they sell electric cars, make less profit than on combustion engine cars. European manufacturers are penalized by tariffs in the United States, which prevent them from selling their cars, or at least make it much more difficult than before. European brands, especially German ones, have lost market share in China due to falling behind in electric vehicles. Japanese brands are also starting to be affected by minor shortages, by supply difficulties, by price increases of certain materials from some suppliers. This is due to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and we don't know when it will reopen, if it ever does. For your information, this morning there was a meeting between European manufacturers, their executives of course, and the European Commission. We don't yet know what will come of it. We'll know tomorrow or in the coming weeks probably if any additional adjustments are possible. And finally, let's quickly talk about Freelander, a brand created by Land Rover in partnership with the Chinese brand Chery. It's launching its first model, a nod, of course, to the Land Rover Freelander name. This model is based on a platform that can accommodate either electric powertrains or range extender powertrains. This Freelander really only keeps the name, since we're actually looking at a vehicle that's more of a high-end, large-size SUV than the small off-roader the original Freelander was. This is the kind of vehicle we're talking about here, which weighs 3.5 tons, actually. Very heavy, precisely because it's packed with equipment, full of comfort features to make it a high-end SUV and not just a simple 4x4. Under the hood, in the launch version, only the range extender will be available. It's a 1.5-liter 4-cylinder gasoline engine that generates electricity on board, using gas to power batteries, which then run an electric motor driving the wheels. It's complicated, but that's how it works. The vehicle will have an 800-volt electrical system, and its battery can be charged on standard power at up to 360 kilowatts.
Situé aux alentours des 360 kW.
First launching in China, it will come to the Middle East and Europe later. The main question is the price, which remains unknown, but it's expected to be expensive. There you go, that's it for these little news updates. I hope you found them interesting. If you did, show it by leaving a like, subscribing, and of course, supporting me by clicking the join button below this video. I'll see you tomorrow for the next one. Bye.